So to start us off, I'm Julia. I'm part of the Sonder editorial team. Um, I am so excited to have Shelley return and for sharing her masterclass on the art of feedback today. A little bit about Shelley. I'm sure you might be familiar with her already, but I'll give you the intro in case you haven't met Shelley or you don't know Shelley. So, Shelley Johnson is the founder of Boldside. She's spent over a decade leading HR teams and coaching executives to build thriving teams. Author, speaker, and columnist for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, just to name a few, Shelley also hosts the award nominated podcast This Is Work. She holds a Master of Human Resources Management, and it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by her today. I'm sure we can learn a lot from her wisdom. Before I hand over to Shelley, I have a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the session. If we don't get to your questions because we've run out of some time, we'll follow up by email after the masterclass as much as we kind of can. This session is being recorded and we'll make it available to everyone to view on demand. You'll receive a link to the recording later this afternoon. So if you need to pop off of it, like drop off at any time, please feel free to do so. You can also share it with your team afterwards as well if you'd like. And we're also joined by Juan, who is our webinar maestro, and we're running all the tech in the background. Thank you so much, Juan. Finally, as I mentioned at the start, we encourage you to use the chat function to make this as interactive as possible. We welcome the conversation. Shelley will do her best to sort of stay on track for the masterclass, but don't be surprised if she's jumping in on some of the comments as well as we go along. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand over to you now, Shelley.
Amazing. Thanks, Jules. So great to be with you all. And I want to just set some ground rules up front because I love a good ground rule. I would love you to bring as much banter as possible. So go nuts in the chat. I think that is really good to hear from you. I want all of your questions. Elmo, Christian, Christian, I want to know where you're from because you know Elmo. Elmo stands for enough, let's move on. So if I'm raving on at any point and you think, Shell, just move along, you can call Elmo on me. Love it. Okay, we're going to jump straight in. This conversation is all about feedback. And for any of our HR people and culture team members, you will know that feedback is a really key part of building a great team. Jules, I think you may have had a poll. I reckon it might be good to jump in with this question because I just want to get a little sense or
Yeah.
read of the room.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Okay, let me see if I can launch this, guys. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, here we go. So first question, how has poorly delivered feedback made you feel? I think we just wanted to set the tone, didn't we, Shelley, on this one?
Yes, so jump in. Tell us if you've been on the receiving end of feedback, how has it made you feel? I want to get just a read of the room. So jump in, put your answers in.
Oh, we've nearly got everyone responding.
Amazing. Countdown time. We're very keen to see what you say.
All right, I'm going to stop it there to keep things moving. So, as you can all see, yeah, we've got a fair few confused, frustrated, insecure, defensive, a little bit of embarrassed, upset, and disappointed, and mostly all of the above. So, yeah, I think that tells the story.
It does. So it's really interesting when we think about feedback, that it can cause a lot of emotions and a lot of responses for all of us. And we've all had feedback that's been delivered well. We've all had feedback that's made us feel either confused or defensive. I want to ask you a quick question. I want you to put your answers in the chat. But before I do, are there any fans of New Girl? Does anyone watch New Girl? Just say yep in the chat if you do. Yeah. Nope. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Love it. So there's this amazing quote from New Girl. I'm just going to pop it on the screen where families talk about things. No, families ignore things until they go away. And it's really funny. Teams can do the same thing. We can often ignore the challenges until they go away. But there's this weird thing that happens on teams. They don't tend to go away. Instead of going away, they tend to get worse. And I want to ask you a question. I want you to take a second to think about it for me. What stops people having tough conversations at work? I want you to think about it and pop your answer in the chat for me. What stops people from having tough conversations at work? Okay, so Sarah says feeling awkward. Yes. Confusion, a lack of trust, damaging relationships, all of these things. Gee, there's so much good data there. Fear of the unknown, avoiding conflict. Yes. Wow, there's a lot of input. Thank you to everyone popping their insights in. I would say generally what stops people from having tough conversations is some form of fear. It could be, as someone mentioned, fear of the unknown, could be fear of upsetting someone, could be fear of not knowing the right thing to say. It's really interesting though, because one thing when we're having these tough conversations, we're often so conscious of the cost of having them. It might be a cost of emotional energy. It might be the cost to the relationship being damaged. But sometimes we need to flip it and look at what is the cost when we actually avoid conversations. And so anyone who is a conflict avoider, I feel you. It is a really common thing for so many people. I want you to think about now, what is the cost of avoiding tough conversations? So take a second to think, what is it costing maybe the business, the team, you personally, to when you avoid tough conversations? And then I want you to pop your answer in the chat. Wow, lots of people saying growth. Jules, do you want to jump into and like distill some of your insights as we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a manager as well, sometimes it can be a bit awkward at first to tell someone that maybe something isn't up to scratch or to the standard that you need.
Mm,
But I feel like if you don't have those conversations early on, then potentially later down the line, it's going to get a lot worse. And then that's when you have more serious conversations around performance, or potential, yeah, just really uncomfortable. Nasty conversations. So I prefer to address things as early as possible. I don't know if you're the same, Shell. I'm assuming so, given you're running this. But I
yeah.
definitely think as looking back as a first-time manager, that was something I definitely struggled with.
Yes, there's a lot of insights here around the situation just gets worse. And you would be right. And the other thing that I know people were mentioning was around retention. So I think you bang on there, Jules. We need to jump in and have timely conversations. At Boldside, we see there being a few key costs. So I'm going to unpack these really quickly for you. Cost number one, let's dig into it, is that, as you mentioned in the chat, things stay the same or they get worse. Number two is gossip increases while trust decreases. This is really interesting. I was talking with the manager recently and they were like, we just don't have the tough conversations in this organization. And my challenge to them was, well, you do have them. It's just that you're having them in the wrong channels. Because what happens when we don't have the direct conversation with the person that the issue relates to, what we then find is we have conversations in the meeting after the meeting or in the Zoom private chats or the Teams private chats. Those conversations still happen. They just happen in the form of gossip instead of happening directly to the person that it relates to. So this is a really, really key cost we see in terms of culture. The next one is we rob people of the opportunity to learn and grow. We tolerate a low standard. That low standard becomes the benchmark. And the worst part is we get mediocrity at best and underperformance at worst. And this is where we see people and high performers typically leave. So there's some big costs and some particularly hard costs around avoiding tough conversations and avoiding these feedback discussions. So here's what I want to do. If anyone would identify as a conflict avoider, I want to ask you this question here. And actually, I'm going to ask every single person to think about this and take a couple of minutes. Now, usually we would have some focus music on, but on my end, I was not technically savvy enough to work it out. So here's what I'm going to get you to do. I'm going to get you to enjoy the space in this moment. Enjoy the thinking time. In your day-to-day work, as managers, as people and culture professionals, we don't get a lot of breathing room. So I want you to think about how this session is a gift to you to give you time to critically think and reflect. And these are the two questions. Number one, what conversations have you been avoiding? And number two, what is the impact on your team or impact on the business? I want you to think about that cost and get specific. Because one way we can overcome our fear of conflict is to actually understand what is that fear costing us. So take a second here, give yourself the breathing room. Don't miss this moment. Self-reflection is a really important part of us being able to course correct. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to jot your thoughts down. Take the time, and then I'm going to come back with some actions for you. Holly, you will get the recording afterwards, so that gets sent out. So totally get it. All right, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds here. And once you've kind of jotted this down, I'd love if a few people feel up to it to pop in the chat the impact. What was the impact of you avoiding that conversation? Because I want us to get really clear on that particular thing is how we overcome some of our conflict avoidance. So feel free, if you're up for it, no pressure. Resentment. Yeah, wow. Okay, so lots of good insights. Ambiguity. Bad behavior continuing. Okay, so already some good insights. I think it's, I think it's Alia, maybe. I may have got that name wrong because it's very far away from my eyes and I'm squinting a lot to see names. Resentment's a really interesting one. I would say resentment is usually a signal, an early warning sign that a conversation has been avoided. So if you have this feeling of resentment towards someone on your team, that's usually a trigger that we've left a conversation for too long. I would just encourage you, if you see that, to jump in and go, okay, what's that signal telling me? Jules, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I saw a really great comment as well from another Julia. So hello. Burnout by the rest of the team. I think that's another one that we often don't think about is that when we have poor performance or maybe work that isn't being delivered or behavior that isn't being delivered to the expectation, the flow-on effect to the wider team is actually quite significant when not addressed. So I just wanted to call that one out and get your thoughts, Shelley.
Yeah, a really great call out. So one thing, and I'm sure you've all seen it, you can think of teams where what happens is when we maybe tolerate underperformance because we don't know how to have that conversation, if you're a people manager especially, what we find is your high performers end up having to either overcompensate, so they have to do more to account for that, or alternately, people who are high performing look around and they're like, well, if this is the benchmark we're going to tolerate, why am I putting all this discretionary effort in? Like, why am I doing all this extra stuff when I look around and team members aren't delivering on what they're meant to be doing and they're not being held accountable for that? So that's a really good call out around the burnout can happen. And also the other thing we can see is like the deterioration of the standards. So very important call out there. And thanks for jumping in on that, Jules, because I think there's a lot to that and lots of people agreeing in the chat. So here's the thing. What do we do? How do we move past this fear, the fear of conflict, the fear of tough conversations? Our strategy for leaders in particular, but any team, is this idea of the power of fast feedback. So one of the things we want to avoid is having these situations go on for extended periods of time. This is how, actually, I'm going to ask you a question. Did anyone, and this is showing my age, and so I'm like a geriatric millennial. Did anyone remember the show 24? It was a TV show back in the day. Yes, a few people. 24, if you're a similar age to me, it was like it was an absolute classic. Jack Bauer. You will remember Jack Bauer, and Jack Bauer would basically solve the problems of nuclear war in 24 hours. He just got so much done in his day. I don't think he ever slept. It was 24 episodes in a season, and every hour was just jam-packed with Jack Bauer solving the world's problems. I want you to think about when it comes to, yes, the clock ticking, 100%. It's absolute classic. I want you to think about this idea of, how do you have Jack Bauer energy? How do you show up to this feedback process and think about the timeline between when an issue happens and when you have a conversation? Those need to be short. So don't let things go on for weeks on end or months on end. Don't wait to the 6-month performance review to have that conversation. We need to have really timely conversations. And this matters not just for constructive feedback. This absolutely matters for positive feedback. And we know from research that positive feedback is one of the ways that we can boost morale and engagement faster than any other strategy at work. So if you want to lead in a way that it's effective, we need to have this fast feedback approach. And when it comes to how we deliver feedback in a fast way, there is just 2 steps. It's simple. 2 steps only. Step number 1 is diagnose. You need to be able to diagnose what is happening here. And I'm going to focus in on constructive feedback for the purpose of this time, because I know we've only got a small window together today. If we were doing our full day sessions that we run with leaders, we would really focus on positive feedback for a lot of this session. But because of our time constraints, we're going to focus on the hard part, which I think is constructive feedback. So I want you to think about, how do I diagnose the problem? And then step 2 is deliver. That's it. Step 1, diagnose. Step 2, deliver. Let's start with this idea of, how do we diagnose the problem? I want to ask you another question, and you can just put in yes or no into the chat, depending on what your response is. Have you ever encountered any weird behaviors at work? It's just an overwhelming yes. Yes, we have all seen weird things at work all the time, says Janelle. I love that. It's the funny thing about people. We're all amazing and weird in our own way, and that's what makes us epic. It's also the thing that can be challenging to navigate sometimes. And so I want you to think about, when it comes to maybe a weird behavior you're seeing on your team, or maybe it's an odd behavior. It's something you think, gee, that's a bit odd. I don't know what's going on there, but I think that might be a problem. This is what we do, and this is the tool we give to leaders. We call our diagnosis tool ODD: observe, distance, diagnose. So this is how it works. First, we need to observe, what is the behavior? What is the situation that's happening right now? And this is where we focus on the facts. Then we create some distance. Create distance from, okay, what happened versus what am I making it mean? And then we go into diagnose. And this is the part where we give the situation some kind of label. Now, I just want to paint the picture of why this process matters. So I was working with a CEO of a law firm one day, and she called me about an issue she was having with her exec team. And she said, hey, Shell, I've got this exec team member, and they're sick every Monday, and they're a liar. And I remember just being like, whoa, what's going on? That is a huge leap to make. So what this manager had done, she had observed something, and she jumped straight to a diagnosis and made this huge leap. And she didn't have any psychological distance between what's happened, this person's been sick, and what am I making it mean? And one thing that happens when we're emotionally charged or when we feel frustrated, we can jump to conclusions that are completely off base. What we did is we walked through this process together. And so this is how it works. We go into this observe. What are you observing? Focus on the facts, not your interpretation of them. So what we did was, okay, how many days has this person actually been sick? So what it turned out was six Mondays in a row. Okay, cool. So there is a little bit of pattern there. But then we go into this distance part. So what happened? This person's been sick every Monday for the last 6 weeks versus what am I making it mean? Well, that CEO was making it mean, well, that person's lying about their sickness. When really what we dug into was, hey, what else could it mean? And as we spoke through this issue, we thought about, well, it could mean that this person doesn't feel safe to raise what's going on for them personally. They may not feel able to talk about personal stuff that's going on in their life. They may absolutely be genuinely sick every Monday. There's all these other things that it could be. But if we don't create distance from the situation, we can jump to conclusions and make assumptions that aren't helpful. So what we then ended up doing is we diagnose the situation as, okay, well, the issue is there's an attendance issue. We don't know why, and that's okay. We have a conversation to talk about that. And what happened inevitably, as I'm sure a lot of you would guess, is in the conversation, there was so much stuff going on for that employee personally that they actually didn't feel safe to raise that in that environment. And so had that manager gone in without creating any distance, they would have had an absolute disaster of a conversation. But what they did is they went in, okay, focus on the facts, not my emotionally charged interpretation of them, create some distance, and then diagnose, okay, this is what the problem is. There's a problem with attendance on a Monday, and it's impacting our team because they had their exec meetings on Mondays. So there was some genuine concern within the business about that. But having the space emotionally meant that they could have a really meaningful and healthy conversation versus a conversation that was really full of assumption and judgment. So this is a really important thing, especially for managers who are dealing with really complex issues. Now, that issue was then able to be resolved and worked through in a really proactive way because of the space this person took rather than reacting. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to use this situation now. You could use it for a complex challenge you're facing at work. You could use it for a challenge that you've got in your personal life. I want you to walk through this process. So think about the conversation maybe you've been avoiding. Answer these questions. What are you observing? Focus on your facts, not your interpretation. Then I want you to ask yourselves these questions, which are really powerful. What happened versus what am I making it mean? And then I want you to give it some kind of label. Now, you don't have to communicate that label to the person, but what it's doing is it's anchoring the concern in your mind. So it's going, is that issue a lack of attention to detail issue? Is it an attendance issue? What is it? So we're giving it a diagnosis. Take a couple of minutes here. I want you to use this thinking time to build the skill. This is us practicing. This is a skill set. So take a moment here. All right. I'd love to know if anyone, as you've walked through that process, and I know we've just done that very quickly, I'd love to know if you had any insights as you reflected on the situation for you personally. If you did, I'd love for anyone who's brave enough, pop them in the chat. What are your insights? one thing I find is that space and distance, it doesn't necessarily mean time. So it could just be 5 minutes of stepping back from the situation. There's a few good comments coming through. So creating the space gives it will help us. And it's such an important part. Allows you to be calm. It also allows you to see it from someone else's perspective. I like to think for myself of the motivations. Yeah, it's a good frame of reference. The other thing I find this tool helps you to do is it helps you to assume good intent. So if you think about that example that I shared, which to us as we're listening, we think that's that person assuming that team member was not telling the truth. Like when we listen to that, we're like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, of course, there could be so many things going on for that person. But when you're so close to a situation, sometimes we lose objectivity. So that little breathing space and stepping back, that is something that can give you that little bit more objectivity about a situation. Yeah, so many good insights there. Thanks to all those people who jumped in and shared. What I want you to do is to think about how you could use this in your day-to-day work. So whenever you see something you think, oh, that's interesting, that behavior, take this time to go observe, distance, diagnose. Excuse me while I drink my water. Now, I think we might have another poll doing. Or Jules, jump in if we do.
I can jump in. All right. So have we done the what stopped people from having tough conversations yet, Shell? No, should we do that one?
Jump in, go for it.
All right, it's launch now for you guys. I know there's only 4 options there as well, guys. So if there's anything else that comes to mind, feel free to pop it in the chat for us and we can have a look as well.
I feel like, Jules, we need that 24 ticking clock.
We do. I was just thinking that. Need a
It
little
would be
timer in the background.
amazing.
All right, I'll end that poll now and share the results. So, number one, we've got fear of upsetting someone, which isn't that, I know it's kind of sad, but also nice, isn't it? It's almost, people do want to make people feel good. And I think we do worry about upsetting someone's feelings by, having these tough conversations or giving feedback. Got damaging the relationship as well, not knowing what to say, and it won't change anything. We've got a few other options as well in the chat.
People wanting
Yeah,
to
fear
be
of not.
liked is a good one too.
Yeah, agreed. And then the fear of not knowing how to handle if it goes off the rails, that escalation point I think we mentioned before, Shell, is also important. All right, I'll stop
100%.
sharing those now.
So I think this leads us then into our next part, which is the part we tend to get most nervous of. I find people can, if they have a framework like this, they can walk through and they can do a good job of the diagnosis. The part where we can get tripped up is the delivery, which is the hard part, right? It's how do we actually say the words? How do we start the conversation? And we've all been in good feedback conversations and bad ones. I want to know, what are the behaviors you see? It could be from the giver or receiver of feedback in difficult conversations. So, what are the red flag behaviors you see in these conversations? And what are the green flag behaviors? The things that you see when people do this really well, either they're great at receiving feedback or great at giving it. What are some of those behaviors? So, pop them in the chat. I want to hear from you. What are some of the observations you've had about when these conversations work well and when they maybe don't go so well? Not specific. Yes, that is a banger. No specific examples yet. Lots coming through about not being clear. Deflecting. Yeah, good call. Taking it personally. Defensiveness. All right. I'm going to ask, there's so many good insights here coming through. Making it personal, 100%. I want to ask a little follow-up question to this. I can see lots of insights. Of those red flag behaviors, what would you say is most common and least helpful? Now, this is tricky. You can only pick one, so have a think. And I reckon there may be a right answer, but you can feel free to challenge me on that. I'm always open to your feedback. What do you think is the most common and least helpful behavior when it comes to feedback? And I want you to maybe think about, in this scenario, think about the receiver of feedback. And I'm going to give out points to the person that gets this right. So I know there'll be someone who does. I think there's a right answer to this question. Not asking for feedback, prescription, deflection, lots of good insights. All right, I'm going to give you what I think is the answer. And this would be what I would see from HR being one of the most common concerns in feedback conversations. And that would be a little drum roll, if you will, defensiveness. Defensiveness in some form. Now, defensiveness has many faces. It could be judgment, it could be a personal attack, it could be deflecting or stonewalling. It has so many different faces. But if someone's getting defensive in a feedback conversation, either they're receiving feedback and they get defensive, which by the way is natural, or if they're giving feedback and they're coming from a defensive posture instead of a curious or open posture, that just shuts down authentic conversation. So when we are in feedback conversations, we have one job, and our one job is to move from defensive to receptive. So if I'm receiving feedback, let's say Jules gives me feedback after this session, I have to think about in my mind as she's giving me feedback, I have one job to move from defensive to receptive. In the same way that if I'm giving feedback to Jules, I'm thinking about how do I help her move from a defensive to receptive mindset. And I love this cartoon from Liz and Molly. Unhealthy conflict looks like you versus me. Healthy conflict looks like you and me versus the problem. This is so important. How do you and me tackle this problem together? And handholding is optional, or maybe discouraged, probably discouraged in the workplace. So, good times. Here's what we're going to do. Yeah, Dane's insight. The second is easier to do in a personal relationship. It feels hard in the workplace. Okay, good call out. We might put that in as a question. How do we tackle the problem together? I think one thing we need to do is first we need to know what the problem is. Often we mistake the problem being the person. The person is not the problem. It could be the behavior that is the problem. It could be the outcome of the work that's the problem. We have to make it about that thing because then I can tackle that together with that person rather than it feeling like me versus them. So it's a really good call out there, Dane. What I want to do is I just want to really quickly, asking them to be part of the solution. So many good insights. I want to share 3 rules of feedback. So if you're delivering feedback, if you're giving it, there are 3 rules of feedback, and I want you to write these down as we go. So rule number 1, before we give feedback, we need to think about this. We need to get prepared. Preparation is really important. So still to this day, after doing hundreds of these conversations, I'll still write down my talking points. I never go into a feedback conversation without having my talking points jotted down, because what that does is it just gives me clarity of mind. And a lot of you said being unclear is unhelpful. So that is step number 1. I want us to avoid the quick chat. This is when we ambush someone. The quick chat is not ideal. So instead, we need to give people context. We might say, hey, I need to talk to you about this particular project. I've just got some input for you. When works for you to chat? And give someone the heads up about that conversation. So not ambushing or blindsiding people, but really asking their input about when works for us to talk about this particular situation. The next rule is straight talk. And a lot of you said this, being clear. So I would refer to that as straight talk in kindness. How do we communicate our concern in a clear and concise way? But as Brene Brown would say, clear is kind. Deliver it in a kind tone. I want you to think about this. We tend to swing towards one side of the equation or another. So where on this diagram do you naturally sit? On one end, we might have, this is a bit cheeky, but we like cheeky at Boldside. So we might have soul crushing, and that's when the message is clear, but the delivery is really harsh. In the middle, we have straight talk, and that's when the message is clear and direct, but it's delivered in a kind and considered way. And then on the other end, we have sugarcoating, and that's when the message is unclear, but the intention is kind. Jules, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to put my hand up. I mentioned it before, but that hesitation about providing feedback because you just don't want to upset them or you don't want to make them feel like, their confidence has taken a hit. So I've definitely been on the sugarcoating end. And I remember one of the earliest mistakes, which you might mention in a little bit, Shell, was the classic sandwich, where it was like, this is so great. You could have done X, Y, Z, but it was so great. It's like, well, it wasn't
Yes,
great, was it? Because if it was truly great, I wouldn't have needed to give you that feedback. And I feel like that's actually crueler in some ways than just being, as to your point, that straight talk. Hey, like this is what you need to action. Like, great. you know?
100%. That's exactly right. Who has ever done the feedback sandwich? It might go by a cheekier name in some circles. Positive, negative, positive. Yes, me. I've done it too. I will absolutely put my hand up. And if you've been on the receiving end of the feedback sandwich, this is what happens. So when we get the feedback sandwich, we either, at most people, because of our negativity bias, only hear the negative. They don't hear those two positives. But our egomaniacs only hear the positives and they miss the negative completely. And so then it doesn't actually serve its purpose. Yes, Renee says it feels like whiplash and diminishes trust. Absolutely. It also makes that positive feedback feel tokenistic. And if you have positive feedback, here's my recommendation to you. Let it stand on its own two legs. Never share it with or side by side negative feedback because of our bias towards negativity, we don't actually get to receive that in its fullness. So my encouragement is let positive stand alone. And when you have something constructive, be clear and direct about it. Deliver it in kindness. I want you to think about how you move in the direction towards straight talk. So for me, I started down here early in my career in soul crushing, and I had to take and because my team gave me feedback in a kind way, I had to take some really proactive steps to make my intention clear that I wanted those team members to grow. I cared about their development, and that's why I was giving feedback. So I want you to think about wherever you sit, take proactive steps to be clear and kind. And the last one is seek their perspective. And this is probably, I think, one of the most important ones. It's a two-way dialogue. It's not a one-way conversation. So we really need to make sure we're injecting our conversations with curious questions, with the ability to seek it out their side of the story, not just ours. And Dan Pink says this beautiful quote, argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. So what I'm going to do in our final little bit before we go to questions, I'm going to share with you our 3-step feedback formula that is not the feedback sandwich. So this is the feedback formula we use at Boldside. Think about SIA, for those of you who know SIA, the musician, situation, impact, action. And this is the fast feedback formula. So we need to give, and a fair few people said giving examples is really key. You are bang on. We need to give examples. What is the situation? What are the examples? Then what's the impact of those behaviors? How is that impacting the team? So that's where you talk about how it made you or others feel. And then in the last one, what's the action? So together you're going to determine what steps are needed. Now I want to say something here. In the action, You either need to be collaborative or prescriptive. For example, if it's a safety issue, you're going to be prescriptive in the action because it's high stakes. But most things, especially if they're behaviorally based, you might be collaborative about it. And I would tend to lean towards, in most cases, being collaborative. Hey, what do you think we could do differently? How do you think we might approach it going forward? What actions could we take to change this? So you need to use your discretion about whether you're prescriptive or collaborative. I'm going to give you an example. Now, this is never perfect, but this is an example of what straight talk sounds like. Now, it might not sound like how you would say it. Does this change? I'm just going to read Jess's answer. Does this change when the power dynamic is different in delivering feedback upwards to a peer? Cool. I would say, Jess, no, it doesn't change. The formula doesn't change. The way you might frame the conversation in the beginning may change it. So you might go, hey, I know you care. So let's say you're giving this feedback to a boss. Hey, I know you really care about the culture of this team and how it impacts our performance. I've got some input for you that I reckon might be helpful. Do you reckon we could talk about that together? And then you can still walk through this exact process. The situation was in meetings, sometimes I don't think our quieter voices are heard. In our last team meeting, a fair few people got cut off. The impact of that is that they don't feel they have a voice, or whatever the impact is, and then go, what do you reckon we could do? How do you reckon we might structure the meetings? So I would say, Jess, that same flow applies, but there's usually something here just beforehand in how you frame the conversation up. So I'm going to let you do a little quick scan of this as an example. And this is from a manager to a direct report. You might find this language a bit too intense. You might find it a bit too direct. The purpose is it's just giving you a framework. I want you to go away and be able to use these ideas to say it in your tone of voice and in your language. Take a second to scan. Once you've finished reading, I just want you to put got it in the chat. And I'm going to show you one final thing before we throw to questions. Oh, look at you all go. Amazing. All right, we've got it. Here's what we're going to do. And I'm going to send you out a toolkit afterwards of this stuff. So you'll get that following this session. I want you to just think about that example you mentioned up front, that complex situation that maybe you've been avoiding. I want you to write down a couple of dot points in each of these. I'm only going to give you 2 minutes here. That's all the time we're going to take. But I want you to start thinking about, how might I deliver this message? How might I frame that up? Whether it's to a direct report, whether it's to a peer, whether it's to your manager. Use this time, take 2 minutes here, jot down your talking points. And then I'm going to throw open for some questions with Jules. My challenge to this group, you've all come on and joined this webinar, is that you take the steps within the next couple of days to have that conversation and step into the mess. My beautiful friend Shane Hatton, who's a leadership coach, says that sometimes we need to say to someone, if we're afraid of having the conversation, is it okay if I give you this feedback in a clumsy way? And so lead with that feeling of the conversation doesn't have to be polished. It doesn't have to be perfect, but having it is better than avoiding it. So be okay to step into the mess, be okay to have it in a clumsy way. I want to hear from you. Jump and message me on LinkedIn if you do. Have that conversation and let me know how you go. I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to throw to Jules now. I would love us to have the opportunity to unpack some of your questions. So, Jules, take it away.
Yeah, just before that, Shell, I love that step into the mess. I was just reflecting on your presentation and potentially how, in the context of today's world, we're delivering feedback as well in ways that aren't necessarily face to face. If I think about myself, there's many tools that I use throughout the day that are often assisted by AI, or even just digital first. So like all the documentation of things, HR programs where you write, feedback or, both positive or constructive. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on how do you sort of navigate that balance? Like what would you say is the type of feedback that would warrant maybe a more casual, like digital first interaction versus feedback that requires, I think, more of that human to human contact or face to face contact?
Yeah, such a good call. So, one of the things we have a little checklist. Is this a conversation or is this an email or is this a Slack message or whatever? And one of the things would be the checklist we would kind of go off, is this feedback going to come as a shock to someone? First of all, is this feedback going to keep them up at night? Is this feedback going to make my job easier but their job way harder? If you're ticking yes, and there's quite a few questions on that list, but if you're ticking yes to all of those, it's a conversation. Whereas, let's say one of the normal practices within our business is when we're working on a particular policy document, everyone jumps in with their feedback and they just put comments in, and that's normal. Well, of course, you're not going to pick up the phone for that. It's just like, yeah, just fire away, put your feedback in. Usually, you will know when you need to have a conversation versus giving feedback digitally because it'll feel higher stakes, it'll often feel emotionally charged, and there'll be a level of resistance. So if there's a level of resistance, that's typically a signal that, okay, this is a conversation or a phone call. It doesn't have to be the face-to-face over Zoom. I find walking meetings can help, any of those types of things, but I would sense check, is this going to come as a shock to someone if they get this in a form of an email or Teams or Slack message?
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Shell. All right, so we have our first audience question from Meryl. So Meryl asks, how could you apply this to giving written feedback when you're unable to meet or giving feedback on a task or document or through performance reviews, etc.? So I guess it's almost a follow-on from the first question. So it's always best if you think that it's unexpected, of course, potentially having that more human interaction. But if you're unable to do that, if there's maybe a chance where you can't meet face to face, do you delay that? Do you just bite the bullet and maybe write it down? Like, yeah, how would you approach that?
Yeah, again, like I think following on from those, if you've ticked the thing, you're like, it's not going to come as a shock to someone. It's not going to keep them up at night getting this as an email or in their performance review. I would say simply follow those dot points of going, okay, here's the example, here's the impact of that. And then I would almost to the point follow that exact formula. And so you can use, I'm using ChatGPT a lot for this of going, okay, here's my feedback formula. I want to be able to communicate this in a performance review. Can you please help me message it out? And like, if that's okay in your workplace based on your policies, use those tools to your advantage. I would just caution, and I was talking with a manager the other day who was like, doing their performance reviews, and they put all their documentation in and all their feedback in and sent it off to the employees before they'd had the conversation. And I know we always laugh about that meeting, that meeting could have been an email, but I think the reverse is so often true. That email should have been a meeting. And so just I caution people when they're giving high stakes feedback. I tend towards leaning to have the conversation because we want two-way dialogue.
Yeah, makes sense. And a follow on from Meryl actually as well. Is there a reverse formula for receiving feedback? I know we talked a little about moving from defensive to, remind me of the word again, it was
Receptive, yeah.
receptive. I love that.
Yeah.
And how we can take that on ourselves as well. But yeah, is there a bit of a way that you'd like to approach that more in a formulaic way for someone if they're getting,
Yes.
I was thinking about myself and how many times have, you received a bit of constructive feedback and you battle with that internal monologue of your ego kind of goes, oh, like, and you have to kind of really take that step back and go, okay, like I have to put my emotional immediate reaction to the side here and really try and listen and unpack what's being told to me. But do you have a way to do that in a more, I guess, formulaic perspective?
I guess we run like a full day workshop with teams, and the way it's structured is receiving feedback and giving feedback. And we have 3 rules for receiving feedback. One thing we try to do in any team we work with is before we train rules on giving feedback, we train teams on how to receive it, especially if you're in a leadership role, because there's a power differential. So you need to really model the behavior of I'm seeking out feedback proactively from my team. One of the rules is around staying curious, because curiosity is like the antidote to defensive behavior. So it's how do I actually ask really good questions, not just do you have feedback for me, but instead I'd be asking questions of, okay, one area, Jules, I want to grow in is my presenting skill set. So before I present on this thing, could you take some notes for me? Could you think about what worked well, what I could improve, and the 1% tweaks I could make that would take it to the next level? By asking you for that feedback in advance, I'm going to get much more quality input from you. So getting really strategic, we didn't obviously have time for that in today's session, but something we definitely do with our teams when we do those full day workshops.
Yeah, great. I know we've only got 5 or so minutes, but I think we can get through a few more. All right, so we've got a question here from Bronwyn. How can I, as HR, encourage a manager to tackle one of these conversations with an employee who is a narcissist?
Yeah, right. Isn't it funny? There's never a day without any drama in HR, Bronwyn. So I feel you. It's tough stuff. Hey, um, okay. A couple of things that tend to happen when you're dealing with, I would just say complex personalities, is the original issue you're trying to tackle tends to shift. So let's say, I'll use an example. I was working with a manager recently and they were trying to give an employee feedback about their lack of attention to detail. And they're like, this person is just not, they don't have attention to detail. But when they went into the conversation, that person was very defensive, just did not want to hear it. So what we needed to do is the original issue of lack of attention to detail can't be addressed. So we have to switch gears now. Our original problem, we can't even tackle that if we first can't deal with the defensive behavior. So when you're dealing with maybe I think we've thrown narcissist as a term around very loosely. Like it's like 1 in every 200 people. It's not a large percentage of the population who would be considered a narcissist. What I would consider as complex behavior would be highly defensive behavior in feedback conversations. So if I'm working with a manager, I'd be saying first, before we tackle lack of attention to detail, we need to show this person that unless they confront and deal with their defensive behavior, we can never grow. So what does that mean for their career? If they're not open to feedback, your career will be stifled. So how can I help you overcome some of these behaviors in order to get to the outcome? If that conversation keeps repeating and you don't see action, well, that's where we move towards performance management, right? So I'm preaching to the choir, Bronwyn, but I would just encourage them to get clear on the original problem often can't be addressed because of the defensive behavior that you would see with that type of personality. So we need to make the problem about the defensiveness, not about the attention to detail.
Yeah, great. Sophie asks, I struggle with the balance between giving sufficient feedback and micromanaging. Am I just being a perfectionist or should I stick by my high standards and expectations?
Yes, really good question. again, I'm going to quote my good friend Shane Hutton. He talks about understanding when performance is, are we being prescriptive because it's our preference, or are we being prescriptive because it's important for the outcome? So you need to be able to differentiate, Sophie, the difference. Is like, if I'm being prescriptive and really detailed about this, is that just because it's my preference in a style thing, or is it critical for the outcome? And if it's critical for the outcome, then go for it. Be prescriptive and get people, you have to train people to understand why that matters. But if it's more of a preference thing, it's like, well, I like orange better than purple because I like orange as a brand color. And well, that's preference. Does that actually matter for the outcome? Probably not. So that's where we need to be able to tell the difference.
Perfect. All right. So we have a question here in the Q&A box for an anonymous attendee. Funny enough, it does relate back to sort of the first question I asked you, Shell. So they ask, one of my team members would prefer all feedback by email first so that she can consider before sharing in person. This goes against my normal approach to giving feedback. What are your thoughts around meeting people where they are and changing our approach to giving feedback depending on the employee's preferences?
I wish I could ask a follow-up question because I'd want to know what is, first of all, what's your hesitation with giving it in writing first if they've asked for it? Like I'd want to dig into that a little bit more. But I think there's two things, and it's always a tension, right? We need to work out this tension. So I would say if it was me and an employee had said that to me, I'd be like, I will try my best to accommodate those preferences where I can, and I'll give you a heads up. My version of it would be, I'll give you a heads up. This is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this particular matter and a little bit of the detail, but we're going to get into it in the conversation. That would be how I would handle that particular situation, because I'd probably agree to an extent that sometimes it may not be reasonable that you are going to list out the fullness of that conversation in writing first. But I'd love to kind of meet them where they're at and give them a level of detail that can help them to feel like they're prepared.
Wonderful. Shelley, that's nearly on time. I just want to have a quick note, an observation, which I loved. I loved how, by getting the foundations of feedback right, we're sort of moving into that coaching perspective, right? Like I saw on your end screen there with the SEER model, a lot of those questions, those follow-up questions, getting them to reflect back on potentially why it didn't work or what they could do better next time. I love that, as a manager myself, I often try and ask those sorts of questions to get them to reflect. And I just think that that's really cool that we're moving, we can move from feedback into this really high performance way of coaching, really, that can turn around potentially a quite negative interaction or a negative situation in general. So I just love that we can move, from something that is considered maybe more constructive into this really great positive space. So thank you for that. Thank you so much again, Shelley, for joining us. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. We'll be sending through, as I said, the recording and the resources. We'll make sure to share Shelley's resources as well with all of you via email, so look out for that. If you have any questions about Sonder, we're not going to do the Sonder spiel today, but you're more than welcome to reach out to us via email. There might be a little bit more information in the follow-up email anyway for you. So yeah, check us out. But thanks again, Shelley, and thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jules, and thanks to everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.